20% of our active duty soldiers are obese. 28% of active duty soldiers are not achieving the minimum CDC standards for aerobic and weight resistance movement. As a culture, we haven't placed a lot of value on physical activity and education, but the public health data is starting to skyrocket on what that's doing to our youth and all of the downward stream effects of that. We see it in the military. 77% of United States individuals from the age of 17 to 24 are unable to serve because they have some sort of disqualifier. The Army had to bridge the gap. And we have a recruiting crisis. H2F in the Army is the largest human performance optimization effort ever undertaken. We're investing in our future soldiers, our current soldiers.
What are the stakes here for the overall military readiness?
Stakes are very high.
Before we start, thank you for all the DMs and great feedback on Kuul Conversations, which I love to hear, so keep it coming. And what would help us even more is if you choose to subscribe. It helps me to bring you more amazing guests and Kuul Conversations. Now let's dive into the episode. Spencer, welcome to Kuul Conversations. I'm excited to chat with you today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate your time.
Absolutely. So for our audience, Spencer Posey is a sergeant in the Army and specifically in working on the Holistic Health and Fitness program. And I'd really love for us to give us an understanding of what the Army's program of H2F is about.
Absolutely. So Holistic Health and Fitness is an Army-wide solution that was brought to the enterprise in 2020, but the inception of it happened a long time ago. We took the framework from a lot of how we've treated our special operators over the last couple decades, our Green Berets, our U.S. Army Rangers, and we also looked at how professional sports teams took care of their players, right? So how they wrap their arms in an interdisciplinary way to provide them direct access to care to improve their performance across a wide variety of the performance spectrum. So Holistic Health and Fitness has 5 domains. It is focused on physical readiness, mental readiness, spiritual readiness, sleep, and nutritional readiness as well. And the Army understands that if we focus on the way an individual optimizes those 5 domains of performance, that they show up as a better individual, they are more lethal, they have a higher quality of life, and they perform better. So they're a better part of a team, a better part of a squad, and then a better part of a unit, right? And if we can educate and empower and invest in soldiers across those 5 domains, investing in our future soldiers, our current soldiers, we're lowering the total cost of medical issues across the lifespan of a soldier's time in service, and lowering the potential cost of what it costs the United States to take care of veterans when they do leave service. So this is a holistic approach to optimizing the human weapon system.
Wow, hugely comprehensive. And coming myself from the sports world, I'm very familiar with the interdisciplinary teams and how impactful they are, from an athlete perspective, in helping my performance. And so I'm curious then, did you use public data, health data to shape that as well as drawing from the sports world?
So the need for H2F came about from some pretty significant Army public health data. And this is all, common knowledge. We're looking at about 77% of United States individuals from the age of 17 to 24 unable to serve based on a wide variety of disqualifying factors. 20% of our active duty soldiers and 23% of our reserve soldiers are obese. Large number of that. We see 52% of active duty soldiers incur a musculoskeletal injury per year. All right. And the average amount of duty days lost from that musculoskeletal injury is 33 days of limited duty. So if we say that times the average of 33 days lost per limited duty profile times 52% of our active duty component, in 2018 that cost the Army $4.7 billion in musculoskeletal injury. 17% of active duty soldiers have a chronic disease. 14% have a sleeping disorder. 66% of active duty soldiers sleep under 6 hours a night, which lowers, and I'd love to emphasize this, lowers combat effectiveness by 50%. And some of the final health data is about 28% of active duty soldiers are not achieving the minimum CDC standards for aerobic and weight resistance movement in a week's period of time. So this program was designed and built to optimize and bring the health of the force up to standard and get soldiers back into the fight, get them able to fight, and optimize their health and performance.
The immediate question that's coming to mind is, and being outside the military community, why? My assumption is that, that you're fit, that that's part of the entry requirements in, and that is a maintenance. Why do we have these statistics?
So that's a great question. And, I think that there is this large stigma that soldiers, may or may not be subject to the everyday woes of an average, American citizen. And they absolutely are. They go through everyday life issues just like anybody else does. They're humans and they're having a human experience. So the health data that we're seeing is actually pretty similar to that of the general public.
Wow.
And we see that, or we look at the Army and we see specifically that, a lot of the media and the marketing there is that we are a fighting force, but there is a significant portion of the Army enterprise that sustains and supports the combat arms, fighters, war fighters. So a lot of these soldiers have similar jobs to those of people on the economy. They're sitting in offices, they're doing, clerical work, they're sitting in skiffs doing, secret clearance work where they can't leave. They're sitting in a container all day where they can't leave. They don't get access to sunlight. They're working long hours. So the force is subject to a lot of the issues that the general populace is. And, we established this program to move the force back to being ready and to be able to execute and engage with the enemy.
How have you seen levels change from your work in implementing H2F?
We see that there are a lot of objective and subjective measures of change. And this is important to foot stomp on, is that the Army as an organization, as an enterprise, does respond well and work on data and metrics. And we have to be able to show that, programs are moving forward. We have to have return on investment. And I believe, and I know this because I've talked to senior leaders about it, is that they do understand the power of how soldiers feel, the environment, their mental and spiritual health. And objective parameters of return on investment, we're seeing 22% lower behavioral health profiles, which is massive. So we're seeing a large increase in morale and the ability to withstand and sustain positive mental health and meaning and purpose. We're seeing a 2% or a 2 times decrease in medical boards, so soldiers getting pushed out of the Army for medical issues. We're seeing 140% fewer injury referrals. We're seeing a 22% increase in soldiers passing the Army combat fitness test. We're also seeing some increase in the cognitive performance of soldiers. In the mental domain, we look at it as the emotional capability, interpersonal capability, and cognitive ability. And when soldiers are put into these extreme tasks, they're high stress, right, and they're required to perform as a warfighter, we want their ability to maintain a solid line of thought, to maintain task and purpose, to be very high and efficient. So we're using cognitive performance experts in the field when soldiers are shooting, when they're getting prepared to do stress shoots or stressful activities, to start using mental imagery and different tools and tricks, to improve their mental resilience. So we're seeing a 22% increase in soldiers who are shooting expert, right? So they're
You had some really astonishing statistics on, particularly on fitness and aerobic capacity, and or we would say inactivity. How have those levels changed? Since implementing the H2F program for service members.
so uh, when we enter the service, we get taught a certain way to exercise, and a lot of the time you're just following orders. And when it comes to physical activity specifically and nutrition, we'll focus on those two. How we're educating and empowering soldiers is we're putting strength conditioning coaches and registered dietitians in the footprint to educate them on the why. Why do we need to train this way? How can we educate our soldiers and our leaders to train other soldiers and leaders in the correct ways of strength conditioning principles, periodization, progression, all of these things that go into creating the optimized human weapon system, right? It's not just go run and do push-ups and sit-ups ad nauseum. It's using a strategic approach that sometimes requires innovation, depending on equipment and austere environments, et cetera, to create the most optimal program for that individual so they can perform at their best. And then when it comes to the food side of the piece of the board, a lot of people, are from different socioeconomic statuses. They have different social determinants of health. They're not always taught or educated on how to grocery shop, cook efficiently, have kitchen competence, if you will. And these registered dietitians are there to give that confidence to soldiers. So we're seeing some amazing impact on these soldiers, but also secondary and tertiary effects of that education. If we educate soldiers, on how to shop efficiently, how to cook for health and performance, how to eat, pre, during, post activity to increase performance, decrease fatigue, they're taking these lessons and they're passing them on to their spouses. They're passing them on to their children. And we're going to see down the road a positive impact in the family, in the military family and dependents because of this education that we're giving the service member.
And that's particularly important, I imagine, because often future recruits come from families that have served. Would that be correct?
Yes. A vast majority of our current recruit pool is coming from legacy families, if you will. The current culture is not pro-military, right? And like I said earlier, with only 77% of 17 to 24-year-olds being able to serve because they have some sort of disqualifier, the Army had to bridge the gap. And, we have a recruiting crisis. And the way they bridge the gap is with something called the Future Soldier Preparatory Course. So for individuals that want to serve in the Army, but maybe they don't have the physical capability to pass entry tests, they can sign up for this Future Soldier Preparatory Course, which is a 90-day program where potential soldiers go down to Fort Jackson, South Carolina, and they are guided in the physical route if they need to, drop body fat or increase strength and endurance so they can pass these tests. And I can tell you that the percentage of people who are going into this Future Soldier Preparatory Course and coming out of it, passing scores and able to enter service is over 93%. We're bridging the gap, and we're doing a lot of good things with that. And a lot of good people are able to serve our country because of
that. That's a really interesting approach in bridging the gap. And I'm curious, like, if we go even further upstream and we, look at the current inactivity levels at youth levels, what are the implications of that, or how might the Army be looking at addressing and bridging further upstream to help with the recruitment?
I think that incurs two things. One is proper influencing, right? We see such a large population on social media, right? And we have to adapt with the way that we market. And we have to adapt the way that we show life in the military. And if we can bolster the message that physical activity, good nutrition, taking care of oneself in a multifactorial holistic way is improving not only our fighting force, but our families and our children, our military children, then that should be infectious to middle schools, high schools, etc. So that's number one. And number two is sharing those individual stories of success that are infectious, and they share the goodness of H2F across the space.
I'm sure you have an abundance of these stories and impactful, I suppose, examples of H2F. What would you say is the most impactful story or that you could share with us on really just amplifying the message of H2F?
I would say here at Fort Myer, with the 3rd Infantry Regiment, we are the Army's only active ceremonial unit, and we are the Army's oldest active infantry regiment. We have such a unique mission and vision. About 60% of our formation are first-term soldiers, right? They're infantrymen, they sign up to shoot, move, and communicate and serve their country, and they get sent to the Old Guard, which is a completely different mission. And it's in Washington, D.C., so, the economical impacts of that are large. And they come here, and there's so much that they have to learn off the bat, right? We dress, or our ceremonial uniforms are different from the rest of the Army. The way that we march and do, drill and ceremony is different. So there's a large learning curve when they get here, which is pretty stressful. And then our mission essential task, number one, is mortuary affairs. So we handle all of the funerals in Arlington National Cemetery, which is a very honorable job, but a very solemn job. When I first got to Arlington National Cemetery, I was a casket bearer. I carried caskets in the cemetery for funerals, laying our brothers and sisters to rest. And that had such a profound impact on me. We are the last touch point that a family has, probably with the United States military. So the need to be perfect, the need to give them the best representation of their loved one's service is so high. And it's also dealing with death constantly. And that's a challenge, mentally and spiritually for anybody who is doing this job, regardless of age, years in service, or resilience. And so they're dealing with that when they come here, or on the other side of the formation, they're doing ceremonies and special events. And weekends don't matter. There are things going on in the National Capital Region at all times, day or night. So some of these soldiers are working on the weekends. They're working super early, super late at night. So the schedule can be very challenging. And all that on top of it, these are young men and women who are coming from all different backgrounds, all socioeconomic statuses, and they don't always have the skills, not only mentally, spiritually, and physically, to deal with this new type of stress. But they're brought to this new formation, and they're put into kind of a sink or swim environment where they have to get a fire hose of information, then adapt quickly to new stimulus. And some of the biggest return on investment or specific success stories I've seen is we discovered a capability gap with soldiers who didn't know or weren't confident with grocery shopping and or cooking for themselves. So I put together a collaborative effort, and we brought in a chef, we brought in a registered dietitian. I gave classes on meals in minutes, which are just very quick, efficient ways to feed oneself for health. And we put on these meal prep classes for these soldiers. And we have a wonderful command team, and they paid for these groceries. But what we did is we put together a healthy list of ingredients. We bought all the ingredients. We brought the soldiers into a kitchen environment. And the chef and the registered dietitian took them through step by step how to create 2 healthy meals for themselves. And they would do it themselves with guidance. They would make these meals, they'd cook them, and they would leave for the weekend with 4 to 6 meals that they learned how to do. They built that confidence, and they take them home and they fill their bellies over the weekend. And the return on investment from that was soldiers who felt confident on how to cook now. They felt confident on what to go buy. They felt confident because they got educated on how to feed themselves, which is such a basic need. But we don't always understand that not everybody has that capability. So meeting the soldiers where they were at and educating them on how to shop efficiently, how to cook efficiently, and how to cook for health and performance impacted them and their families, which was phenomenal. So I would say that, that movement specifically that we did here at the 3rd Infantry Regiment has had massive positive return on investment just from how we see soldiers feeding themselves, which is something that, we all do every day, multiple times a day, but we don't often understand the impact that can have on our health, our mental status, and our physical performance.
Have you seen any interesting, I suppose, examples, or have you any personal stories of how your work in improving physical activity and fitness of service members has, rippled out across further?
Absolutely. So while H2F is solely directed at service members for now, right, we do understand that the support at home is vital to support and winning on the battlefield, winning at the mission, whatever it is. And we have focused a lot of time and energy into how can we engage our spouses, our children in these efforts. So the way that we're incorporating and have seen positive effects across the family unit with efforts like this, specifically I call building strong and ready teams. We invite the service member and their family to events, whether it's education, social gatherings of food, whatever it is. There's always a curriculum, but it engages both the service member, the family, and the children in some sort of learning pattern that looks to increase the readiness of families across those spectrum. Including our families in those events has been awesome, and we've seen that in the family unit, if we can engage and incorporate our spouses and children, that the overall effectiveness of the behavioral changes that we're trying to create in service members does spread out to the family unit.
That's an incredible outcome, because it's the thing we struggle the most with, even in general population. And we see that in the schools, in the work that we do. It does trickle out, but how can you engage the families? And so what are the lessons from the successes that you've found in engaging, we'll say, family members? What are some lessons that we could apply maybe more generally to the general population? And I'm thinking of schools and young kids.
I think specifically, I'd like to foot stomp on the positivity of physical activity, right? And how that affects not only our physical capabilities, but our mental status, right? So we see across research that physical activity decreases anxiety, decreases depression, the physiological effects from physical activity, regardless of whether it's walking or rollerblading or water polo or whatever it is you choose to do, weight training, etc. That not only are there positive physical responses from that, but mental as well. So if we can get families moving as a unit, whatever that may be, and it's kind of a choose your own adventure, if you will. We don't want to pigeonhole people into moving a certain way or into enjoying their physical activity in any way besides the way that they want. And I think the lesson to be learned here for the family unit is that children are going to follow the examples that their parents set, most likely. And if we can have healthy parents that are talking and exhibiting positive physical activity behaviors, that they are more than likely to be exhibited by the children.
So the role modeling piece is critical to your work in reaching and amplifying the impacts that you have. I'm curious then, if we were to extend into the H2F program into schools and take elementary schools across the country, what could that look like, or what could we learn from that?
The idea that if we can provide a more direct access to care, and education quite often being the barrier to entry, it's just people don't know what they don't know. And, with this social learning, environment that we see with social media, a lot of people see and they do, from influencers on social media. And that may not obviously always be the best route, and it may not be coming from a valued, resource source. So if we can get left of that, and we can put some type of professional, some type of educational source in front of these audiences, our youth are going to be better positioned based on the education they are given at a younger age on how to move, eat, sleep, and train efficiently.
Yeah, and you're speaking to a really critical point that we're actually seeing in schools is that PE, maybe the assumption has been that PE was always like a steadfast in as part of school curriculums, but actually what we're seeing statewide is that and countrywide is a decrease in physical education being offered or being taken up by students. And I think the challenge is now becoming that it's entered it within the elementary schools. So when we talk about education and where kids, how critical you're emphasizing, getting the right information and the right education, we're at a difficult point here. Do you have any thoughts on that? Because when kids go to school, if they're getting little recess time and not a lot of physical education, where are we? How are we going to solve the education piece?
Education is something that is necessary, but we also have to understand that children and human beings are meant to move. And as a culture, we haven't placed a lot of value on physical activity and education, but the public health data is starting to skyrocket on what that's doing to our youth and all of the downward stream effects of that. We see it in the military. We saw the effects of isolation and lack of activity over COVID, the acute COVID pandemic, and how that has affected the force negatively. But I think that one of the biggest effects it had was on our children. Right? It took them out of school. It isolated them. They weren't able to leave their homes, most likely, and go out and engage in childlike activity or sports. And they lost valuable years of their life and valuable time on how to connect, how to move their bodies. And we're seeing the negative effects of that. So we have to push physical activity.
What are the stakes here for the overall military readiness?
Stakes are very high. And that being that a lot of the population cannot serve, right? Because of, what we talked about earlier and, most of them not being unqualified for a variety of matters. And, we are in a peacetime environment relatively right now. But I can tell you that when the next fight comes around, right, the quality of our soldiers is going to be a massive determining factor for if we're able to close with and destroy the enemy and win that fight and come home. H2F is positioned to improve the performance of soldiers. The United States Army is not going to lower the standard of soldiers, right? We can train people to come to the standard, right? But we're not going to lower the bar because we understand that quality is more important than quantity.
And I imagine then that leadership, like your own leadership in this, is absolutely critical to promoting this culture. Can you share some examples of this strong leadership that's making this difference, that's moving the needle against when the stakes are so high?
Absolutely. The leadership at the top of the Army is fully invested in holistic health and fitness. Our current Chief of Staff, General George, and our Sergeant Major of the Army, Weimer, have spoken about H2F and its value and its importance. As leaders, this type of program will live and die based on the quality of its leaders. It says that in the doctrine, in the H2F doctrine. And, leadership requires investment, time, money, and people to change a culture. How do we change culture? To me, culture is a series of behaviors that is displayed across an organization, little behaviors that are displayed on a daily regimen across an organization. So if we can educate people on how to train right, how to sleep right, how to feed themselves well, and leaders are doing those things. Leaders are taking time to eat, to sit down and have meals with others, to have good meals. If they're taking time to train their bodies when is most optimal for them, if they're encouraging and talking about improving their quality of sleep and duration of sleep, and they're getting rid of this dogma of, I'll sleep when I die, or I'm a more productive leader because I sleep less than you, right? If we're talking about our mental health and understanding that it is proactive to talk about mental health,
right,
and it is required to how do we learn about our soldiers? How do we learn about our formations? We have conversations with them that are below the surface. We talk about their lives. We talk about what they care about, what they're struggling with. And then we remind ourselves, regardless of the level of leadership or servitude that we're at, that we always have a meaning and a purpose, and that is individual to oneself, and that is a driving factor. If we can display that across an organization, that's culture. And leaders have a ginormous effect on that by the decisions they make every day, by the actions and the lives that they lead.
You're a leader. What does that look like for you to walk the talk on a daily basis?
I've been pushing my human performance in a variety of factors for over 15 years. And I continue to learn. Let's say we talk about my sleep. And, just this year, the Army diagnosed me with sleep apnea. I'm a large human. And I was like, no, not me. I sleep well. But I went and got a sleep study. And I have sleep apnea. Okay, how can I fix that? I can set better conditions for sleep, right? Because how we sleep affects our cognitive performance, our reaction time, our mood, right? It affects our physiologic response to training, so many things. So if I found that out about myself and I said, I could sleep better, right? And I could probably, I'm a large guy, but if I can lower my body fat, I'm going to sleep better. I'm going to lower the effective load on my system. And I tell the soldiers how to set conditions, right? How to, what type of surface to sleep on, how much light to have. I give this funny little vignette of myself. I always thought I slept well, and I usually had like room darkening shades. One of the best investments I ever got off Amazon was this ridiculous $16 sleep mask. So when I go to bed, I put this little sleep mask on. I look like a princess, but I tell you what, the quality of my sleep dramatically increased, right? Because your eyes are always on, regardless of whether your eyelids are closed, and little light can affect your, the stages of sleep. So now I go to bed with this little sleep mask on, and I sleep great. So little vignettes like that. So I've worked on my sleep this year. I've worked on my aerobic capacity. I've been in the strength and conditioning community for over a decade as a coach, as a leader, as a mentor. But I reached out to folks outside of my specific realm to ask about how to improve my aerobic fitness. I got into cycling this year and also yoga. Now I know the Army doesn't like to call it yoga. We call it TMAR, Tactical Mobility and Active Recovery, because it can't be yoga. But if we can get soldiers doing that, if we can get them slowing down and having maybe a spiritual experience while moving and stretching their body, it's a positive thing. So for me, it looks like this year, improving my sleep, improving my aerobic capacity, and slowing down and focusing on ways to get more in touch with myself, and yoga has been one of them.
That is such a critical point, because how can you expect to, as you talk about building culture, because behaviors, it's sets of behaviors, and if it's not happening at a leadership level, it's very hard to convince everyone else to follow. And so I'm curious, when you look across leadership in the military, have you seen the principles of H2F, looking after physical fitness, nutrition, or your health in general? What does that look like across leadership?
While H2F in the Army is the largest human performance optimization effort ever undertaken, right?
Wow.
We haven't really gotten to the point where we're incentivizing healthy behaviors. Now, there's probably a dichotomy of thought about that in the leadership, that soldiers should innately want to exhibit these healthy behaviors. And that may be a controversial topic at the top of the food chain, incentivizing in some way, right? And so often in the military structure, we see that we have to start at compliance. You will do this, and then we see the positive effect, and then we get commitment. But in terms of human performance, if you start to mandate human performance, I strongly believe that it loses a lot of its power. Right? Because when you make someone do something, you inhibitly take away their autonomy, you take away their ability to make that decision, and they're not going to be as invested, right? So I think probably have a much more streamlined path to that culture of commitment versus compliance.
That's really interesting, and I'm drawing parallels to our own work at Cool Play when we look at kids. And it's a little bit like if you tell kids, you need to exercise, it can be viewed as punishment. All right, let's do this because we need to be fit, we need to do this. And sometimes you can apply extrinsic motivation, like gamify it, and things like that. But what we've really noticed in our own work with kids is, especially kids who are considered labeled non-athletic or not sporty, is that if you can tap into the intrinsic motivation, and you've talked about it, purpose and but also the joy of moving and tapping into that, it's a huge and powerful motivator for kids, and sustainability, and it leads to sustainable health behaviors. And so I'm curious then, how are you thinking about incentivizing or tapping into that, we'll say, within H2F, or have you done some work on that?
I think when it comes to incentivization with service members and healthy behaviors, that most likely it does not look like the entire Army creating an organizational effort of incentivization. I think it happens at the lowest levels. Now, the way that we incentivize it is, a lot of people in the military occur what's called social jet lag. We wake up super early throughout the week, and then on the weekend we sleep in, right? And it dramatically alters our physiological response to training. We had what was almost called a sleep contest. We would say, okay, the soldier that comes in on Monday morning and he has the best quality and duration of sleep over Friday, Saturday, and Sunday night, then later that week, they get some sort of incentivization. They get to come in an hour late. They get to have an extra half hour on lunch. They don't have to do group organized PT, whatever it is. And there was a left and right limit to what was available to them, but we gamified it a little bit. We said, hey, if we can incentivize a positive behavior, increasing sleep quality and duration, right? Not only are you going to feel better, you're going to perform better, and then we're going to reward you for that. So things like that are ways that you can incentivize at the lowest level and improve healthy behaviors. I did want to say, something that I have noticed, and something that you touched on a little bit, was a lot of times, especially in the realm of children, that there are barriers to physical activity. And how do we overcome that? A lot of people see physical activity in a pretty narrow spectrum. And and what we're not doing is we're not giving access and availability to a choose your own adventure of physical activity, right? Whether it starts with children or adults, giving them options across a wide variety of spectrums. It's not playing football or going out and running 5 miles. It's going out and walking around the park. It doesn't always have to be, this militant attitude of hard training. It's just movement. Movement is medicine.
I love that. Big proponent of that, and it is, and I apply it in the same way in terms of sport. Like all sport is movement, but not all movement needs to be sport. And you've kind of alluded to that there, in that I think a really key message for everyone is understanding that there's infinite ways to move, and it's finding ways that you enjoy and like, and that the options are there if you so wish to choose it. That's really brilliant. I'm really curious, with all the work, we'll say, that you're doing, how do you see collaboration between public and private sectors in addressing physical inactivity? I mean, you have H2F as the largest human optimization data and program that we have. And, how can we leverage collaboration, to address even a larger, wider societal issue, but also, help, because often our approaches are quite siloed. Do you have thoughts on that, or have you seen any successful partnerships that you've engaged in?
Absolutely. One of my, I guess, mottos, if you will, is collaboration over competition. And it's, there are tons of efforts out there, tons of amazing people that are moving out towards affecting change in the general populace in a positive way. But quite often we're not brought to the same table. We're not aligning efforts, reducing redundancies, sharing best practices. Specifically, one that I can say off the top of my head, George Washington University here in DC is doing longitudinal studies on the physical activity of students throughout the lifespan of their college career. And it goes down substantially from a freshman to a senior year, most likely because of the investment needed to continue to maintain academic excellence. but they're trying to look at the data and say, hey, where throughout the college career is this taking a significant downturn? How can we get ahead of that? How can we encourage increased physical activity, which we see positive effects on mental health and grades and overall quality of life? So that's one specifically, kind of in the public university sector, that I can speak upon.
That's a really good example and hugely impactful. I'm really curious that we've covered so many different areas, so many topics, and for someone listening here today, what would be the key takeaway that you would like them to walk away with?
That health and performance are very different things, right? And we need to focus on health to achieve performance in some way, shape, or form. And, there is a large focus in the culture of physical activity and how we train ourselves, right? But we can't recover from life and or training if we're not focused on the non-physical domains of our health, right? Which to me is the way we sleep, the way we eat, the way we mentally train, and our spiritual meaning and purpose. And without those non-physical domains, we're not going to get anywhere. It takes, personal accountability and responsibility to focus on what we put in our mouths, right? How we sleep and how we take care of ourselves mentally and spiritually. And those things to me are what create, optimized humans across the lifespan. It's not always how we take care of our physical bodies. It's how we take care of our minds. It's how we take care of our spirits.
Is there something that I haven't covered or I haven't asked you, or is there a question that you wish you have been asked around all of the work that you're doing?
I think that not a specific question. I think that the movement that the Army specifically is leading the way on in taking care of people is the most robust and individualized way that the Army has looked at improving individuals across the DoD space ever. We are leading the way, and that doesn't mean that we have it perfect. It means that we are adapting, we are responding to new stimulus, we are evolving. And if we can collaborate across the Department of Defense and, again, align best practices, reduce redundancies, share interventions and metrics, there is so much goodness to be had in how we take care of our warfighters and then our families and our and our children, that if we can align those efforts, I can see that as a warfighting force that encompasses our warfighters, our families, and our dependents, that we are going to be better positioned as a society and as a warfighting force to move out into the next 5-10 years and maintain our status as a world power, to maintain our status as the freest and best country in the world.
Sergeant Spencer Posey, it's been such an interesting conversation. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise, all the information on H2F and the incredible impactful work that you're doing to keep the world a safer place. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you for having me.